Hello guys, and welcome to another Manston Air instalment. This time we're going through the E-Jet series and we're going to fly the Embraer 170. The 190 is exactly the same aircraft, it's just a bit heavier and there's slightly different speeds and weights, but the principles of flying both aircraft are exactly the same. So we're here at Manston, Echo Golf Mike Hotel, with our modded airport here with the terminal building. And let's just jump right into it here. So into the flight deck, and we are cold and dark. So the first thing we need to do is switch on the batteries. So we go up to the overhead, and the batteries, in fact the whole electrical side of the panel is on the left here. We turn battery 1 and 2 on. That will present a couple of ICAS messages. That's quite normal, just as all the built-in tests happen, and they throw up their little messages. But let's get some ground power on, so GPU to in use. Now that will fire up all the screens, and you should have this attitude fail as the inertial reference system IRS is aligning. So just a quick overview of the overhead then, now the power is on. In general, when we do a scan, we go from left to right on this panel. And in flight, we are looking for all 12 o'clock switches and all lights are off. So lights extinguished 12 o'clock for normal flight conditions. On the ground it's slightly different because things are out of place, because things are off, or we've got, for example, the ground power unit in use, so that wouldn't be illuminated. And additionally down here you've got like parking brake is illuminated. Again, that wouldn't be illuminated in flight. So let's just go through it. In real life you would test the voice recorder there. You'd then come down here, ensure this is all as it shows at the moment. You have some power of some description, either the GPU or the APU, and then you can turn on these cockpit lights. I've already turned them on. If you're at night you could turn the dome light on. This is the fuel panel. There's the fire switch, we don't touch that unless if we're on fire, engine's on fire. This is the fuel panel. If you do need to crossfeed, this is your crossfeed switch. You switch it to the low side and it will take from the other side. This is the passenger sign. So our next thing to do is to test the emergency lights. Now we're using the Feel There model. Feel There Embraer's version 3, and although it's not the best model in the world, it's actually a pretty poor model, but it's the best model that there is for the Embraers that I know of. There's also a pretty good model in X-Plane, but for P3D and FSX this is the best model there is. So when we go to on the passenger signs, you will get a message. The message basically is telling you that the switch is not in its armed position, which is the 12 o'clock position for normal flight, and the emergency lights are on. In real life this is an emergency light. This would come on and you'd check that would come on and you'd see emergency lights going all down the cabin, but it's not modelled in this for some reason or other. So once we've tested that and those messages shown, we can just switch it back to armed, ready for flight. You've then got these 3 switches. Now all the light switches, I'm talking about these ones here on the passenger signs and the external lights, they're a bit they work opposite to the way that you would think they work. So on is towards the rear of the aircraft and off is forwards. So as long as you remember that, you're alright. The stereo light remains off at the moment while we're, for example, boarding. The no smoking sign always remains on, and once we're done fueling, which we are, the passenger signs, the seatbelt signs can go on. So that's now in the on position. And then we can move to the next panel. This is again for the fire detection test. So you've got like APU, fire extinguisher, and I would just test this. So again you would get a message associated with that, but I may not have pushed it just enough. You could just hear it starting there. These are all for fire extinguishing, so for APU, engine 1, engine 2. In the real aircraft you'd pull it and rotate it for fire extinguishing, so rotate to extinguish, but for some reason there's these 2 buttons up here. And then moving down to the APU control, Well, we'll be starting up soon, so I'm just going to switch the APU on now. So to switch it on, you go all the way across to start and it will flip back to on. And you should see down here, this is the APU here, it'll start to spool up from 0%. Any second now, there we go. Just beginning to start up. And that's emergency stop for the APU. Then you've got the windshield wipers, if you need them, they're there. External lights, so again, up towards the rear of the aircraft is on. So we'll just turn the nav lights on for now. Everything else can remain off during the daytime at least. And then to the next panel, hydraulics. On the ground, before pushback, electric pump 3A goes to the off position. So that remains as it is at the moment. Everything else 12 o'clock. Pressurization is as it is. And everything else here for the packs and so on, again, can remain as they are. Moving on from the overhead, we go down slightly. This is the camera for the cabin. So you turn it on with the left switch, and you can go through the views with the right switch. We'll just leave it on this view because this is, yeah, that's correct, this view, so we can see anyone coming to the flight deck door. And then we come down basically to the main panel here. Now the first thing I would do is set up the screens. So we'll do that now. I'm just going to move views here so we can see if we can see this any better. There we go. So we're talking about this panel. They're called MFDs, multifunction displays, and what we're doing is setting up the map displays. So we click on map, and then we click on it again, and it brings up this menu. Now Embraer were going to create a software that did this automatically from startup, but they never got around to it. So what we'll have to do is tick every single box. That's what we do. And then you get your vertical profile and all the other information that we need during flight set up. This is really fiddly. It's much worse in the real aircraft. In the real aircraft, you would use this CCD cursor control device and click on what you need. But on this, I mean, it's not just that you have to click the screen, which is not a touchscreen in real life. It's just that the touchscreen setup they've made is really clunky and not very good. So you check that plan is all ticked as well, which it is, and then you can put the weather radar to standby, and we can leave the TCAS as it is for now. It says, there we go, close. Back to status on the captain's side, so it's showing this picture with the aircraft and all the pressure figures on the left hand side, and on the FO side do the same again, so ticking all the boxes from map. Ooh, there we go. And again, checking plan is ticked, and double checking the weather radar is on standby. It is, and then you would select electric on the FO side. So you can now see that the APU has taken the load. You can see that green line from the APU to feed the AC buses, which then go into the DC buses and the batteries. So that's good. When we start our engines, that's an important thing to look at once we've started. But right now we'll leave it on that page. So the screens are now set up as they should be. So now we can jump back to this view and just double check the overhead. Now the GPU has jumped to avail rather than in use because the APU has taken up the load. I'm just going to push that button out. And now we can start setting up some of the flight guidance control settings. So up here is the FGC, the flight guidance controller panel. On the Boeings, it's known as an MCP, a mode control panel, but on the Embraers, it's for flight guidance. What we'll do is effectively just go from left to right, shall we? So let's set the Barrow. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to push B, be a bit cheeky, and push B, which automatically sets it. The knobs in this aircraft on this model, the Feel Their model, is very poor. They take a long time to move. So it's worth just, if you've got shortcuts, use them. Then we're moving across. We don't need a course for takeoff, and then we can set the heading. So that's at Manston, it's 282 on the chart at least it's 282, so we can set that up for departure. Runway 28, we'll just double check the wind. Yeah, runway 28, and the speed, we will set that for VFS. At the moment we don't know what the speed is. Altitude out of Manston, always 5,000 at the moment, because we're trying to keep out of controlled airspace as we take off. And that is it for the initial setup on the FGC. What we'll do just now is get some flight guidance showing up. So even at this stage on the ground, what we do is hit toga. It won't matter because the auto throttle's off at this stage. So you go down to the thrust levers here, and this little button here is for toga. This is the auto throttle disconnect, but you want this one. So you push that, and you should get this sort of T-bar of the flight directors and roll and take off. So then you know that toga is engaged as it should have. So as long as that's displaying, that's good. Then I'd move down slightly to the auto brake and just switch that RTO for takeoff. So next up is setting up the FMCs, or the FMSs as they're called in the Embraer. They are MCDUs. This is an MCDU, and this is how we enter information into the FMS. So we'll set that up in just a moment. I'm just going to lock the door here, and let's get straight into it. So I've moved to this view so we can see it a bit more clearly, but we'll work predominantly on the left-hand captain's side MCDU here. On the first page you're met with the radio page, and you'll see that the frequencies for normal comms are on the left. You can flip them over and you can tune, for example, 122.8, or in fact you can even do 228, 122.8, and that will go 122.8, and then you can literally flip it over and there's your active frequency. Same again for the navs, for VORs and ILSs. I'll just show you now, during normal conditions we remain in FMS auto, but if you are going to manually tune something, let's for example say we're tuning 108 for whatever reason, and we flip that to the top, you'll lose FMS auto. And there's two ways of getting that back. That certainly in the real aircraft, I haven't checked on this. The easy way is hitting delete and then going to that frequency and you'll get it back. But for example, if the other way should be, no, it doesn't do that. Okay, so delete and put it on the top and you'll get FMS auto back. That's how you go back to FMS auto if you come out of it. And then the radio and transponder. So this we do set up. We'll set 7,000 for the squawk here. Transponder 1, it means it's the left side. We'll double click. So if you double click on the transponder code, it brings you to this menu, and that's where you can switch to transponder 2, and you can change the flight ID, which we will now. We're flying the Manston Air 508, the Invictus 508. So India November Victor 508 is in the box, and then we can go back to radio. Another menu you might want to just quickly do here is transponder, TCAS transponder. Go into that and just switch it to alt on, because that's the taxiing mode. If you go back to radio, you've now got the transponder to alt on. Just hit it back to standby. So all you've done there is preset it, so all you need to do is push the bottom left button when you start taxiing, or pushing back even. So we've just preset that there. So that's the radio page, done and dusted. Next we're going to start setting up for the nav. So we're going to go to nav. We're going to select the GPS position here. It says loaded, it's got rid of that no position message gone. And then to flight plan. Once we're in the flight plan, now we can start setting up where we're going to go to. So we're going to Rotterdam, Echo Hotel Romeo Delta, and then we can start filling it out. So the route to Rotterdam is quite a short one. We're using Dagger as our departure point. Dagger. And then for airways, if you want to use airways, it's quite easy. So you put in the airway for this one is Papa 44 dot your next waypoint, Clacton. So Charlie Lima November, and it's only one waypoint there, but that's what you would do. And we'll do again for Redfer L, so Lima 620 dot Redfer. Okay, and that's the route. So then we can bring it up from to close off the route. What you do is use the destination here, bring it to the scratch pad and put it to the via 2. That finishes off the route, and then you do is hit activate, and then just add on an alternate airfield for us is Echo Hotel Alpha Mike for Amsterdam, and we'll just bring that to the via 2 to close off the alternate. Activate. Then what we can do is put in a departure. You can go about that 2 ways. You can either hit the bottom left, so line select key left 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. Or you can go to nav departure, it's there as well, line select key 6. So we'll just use this one. And then you would hit runway 28, because we're going over departing runway 28. And then if it wasn't Manston, there would be a bunch of SIDs here, standard instrument departures you could select. And then you would hit insert and activate. So the next step is to start doing performance. So we go to the perf page, for performance, perf init for performance initialization. These are basically our speeds that we're using for the FMS speeds. So at Manston Air we are using 280 /.75 for the climb, 300 /.78 for cruise, and 300 .76 for the descent. And that will just give you a 3-degree descent. Now you can change the 3 degrees if you want. If you've got, for example, a tailwind, I would leave it at 3 degrees. If you've got a headwind, you can probably afford to do like a 3.5 degree slope for the VNAV. But we'll leave that as it is. Those are basically safe settings for most flights. Then we go to next. You'll get these figures from your flight plan, which is covered in another video. So we're going to use our fuel reserve, which on the Embraers, unlike the Boeings, you literally just use the reserve. So 637 on this one. The taxi is the next section. So we're only bothered about taxi out. We're not interested in taxi in fuel, because once you've landed nobody cares about what fuel you've got left. So taxi out is 80 kilograms. And then contingency on this one is 106. Straightforward enough. We won't do a step increment because we're not doing any step climbs. Next page, so we're on page 303. Transition altitude at Manston, 6,000 feet. Initial cruise is basically your cruise altitude. This is quite an important setting, actually, the initial cruise altitude, because not only does it affect your performance and what the aircraft thinks it's going to, but it also affects the air conditioning, the pressurization. So if you are going to step climb or change your cruising altitude in flight, whether that's up or down, if ATC gives you constraint, for example, always remember to change this as well as the FGC up top. So on this one, it's quite a low initial altitude, 270. In the real aircraft you put FL 270, but this one lets you put in 270. You can then bring that back to the scratch pad and bring it to at altitude. If you know the ISA deviation, you can put that in. To be honest, it's not that important for fuel, unless you want to be exact about your fuel burn. you can put that in. For the cruise winds, you just take an average sort of wind, so I'm going to use 222 at 77. So it's now saying that the ISA deviation and the cruise winds is, for example, 0 degrees plus or minus the ISA at flight level 270, and the cruise winds at 270 are 222 at 77 knots. That's what the out altitude means. Now the zero fuel weight. I'll quickly show how you get this. I've already noted all of this down, but it's important. So you go hit Alt on your keyboard and you go up to Vehicle, Fuel and Payload. So here is where basically you refuel and put your payload on for the flight. The important thing is you have this this setting here ticked, display fuel quantity as a weight. That way you can put your fuel quantities in as weights. You can see there's a bit of a discrepancy here because we've started burning fuel from the APU on the right tank. It does take from the right tank unless you're cross-feeding. And then down here you've got your weight. So to get the zero fuel weight, what you do is you take your gross weight, you minus your fuel, so 32,555 minus 3655, and that will give you your zero fuel weight. It's all the weight minus the fuel. And then so that's what we'll do, and I've done that already when we started, so I'll click cancel and I'll bring up what I've already done here. So weights, you see here we had a gross weight of 32.6. we then minused our fuel of 3.7. It's a little bit less now, but nevertheless it's close enough. That gives us a zero fuel weight of 28.9. So I'll put in 28.9, and that gives us 32,550 on the gross weight. 32.6, so that accounts for the fuel that we have burnt, the 50 kilograms there, discrepancy. So you just double check that's all correct, and then you click confirm initialization. So that's the initial perf done. Next we do the takeoff performance. So what I'll do is start using the right hand FMS as well as the left, so try and pay attention. Perf on the left hand side, perf init, previous page, so you go to page 3. So you're on performance initialization page 3, the same page we just filled in on the left hand FMC. That will give you the gross weight that we're going to use to calculate our takeoff performance. So on the left hand FMC we're going to have perf, we're going to do what we're doing next, which is going to be taking off, so takeoff. We leave page 1 empty, we leave page 2 empty, and we go to page 3. This is where you fill in the takeoff speeds. Now to calculate the takeoff speeds we have published a couple of documents for the Embraers, both the 170 and the 190. And they are currently available on our Discord, and they may be made available elsewhere very soon. And basically they're taken from the real world Embraer flight operations manual. So if I go to that document now, this is what it looks like. This is the E170 takeoff landing speeds document. So you'll start with the takeoff speeds. The first half of the document is all takeoff speeds, and you'll see its various settings. So Embraer 170, takeoff 1, flap 1. And as we scroll down, for example, Embraer 170 takeoff 2, flap 1. And we've got, for example, Embraer 170 takeoff 2, flap 4. Now there's a separate document for the Embraer 190. It looks exactly the same, just with different figures. So you have all of that for the takeoff speeds, and then it goes to landing speeds, Embraer 170 landing speeds. And again, there's different tables. So there's without ice accretion, with ice accretion, Cat 2 operation with or without ice accretion, and then steep approach operation, approach and landing reference speeds, with and without ice accretion. Okay, so that's all the speeds there. Now to use this table, I will just go through it, because although I've got the speeds out of it already, which are all here, and I'll show you how I got them, I will show you how to use the table. So we're a gross weight, or near enough a takeoff weight, of 32.6. We're going to burn off about 100 kilos. We have already burnt off 50 kilograms, so we'll use 32.5. We're going to use, well actually, I've done it for takeoff 1 flap 1. We'll use takeoff 2 flap 1, which is a lower takeoff thrust setting, but the same flap. So we use this table here, Embraer 170 takeoff 2 flap 1, and we're using 32.5, okay? So to go in for the table, you use the left-hand side initially. We're near enough at sea level at Manston, so going at sea level. The temperature is between -40 and 34. It's usually going to be in this first column. And then we go down from there, and we're now into this table here, so we know it's going to be in this column. And we said 32.5, so we find the weight 32.5, and there are your speeds. Now I'll just double check, they are slightly different from what I've got. So 32.5 is 135, 142 remains the same, and 145 remains the same. Now you'll notice there's one extra speed here on this document which isn't in the table of speeds, and you do need this speed. It's the VFF speed, which is your basically your minimum clean speed once you've cleaned up the flaps. To get that, you actually have to go to the landing speeds. It's a little bit backwards, but even for takeoff you have to go to the landing speed, to find the VFS speed. So we go all the way down to the landing speeds without ice accretion, so it's the first table, and we find 32.5. Now there's only 32 or 33 here, so we'll take an average of the two. We go all the way across, so VFS is the last column here, yeah? So all the way across, it's between 187 and 190, and I've gone in and taken 188. I've just made an average sort of thing. So 188. So those are now our takeoff speeds, and later on when we land, we'll fill in these landing speeds. So that's done. Back onto the simulator, we can start filling it in. So it's a V1 135. Rotate 142. A V2 145, and I think it was 188 for VFS, so I will double check. 188. Okay, so that's how you fill in the speeds, and again you keep this one up just for a reference of the actual weight of the aircraft for takeoff. So that's set. Then you're going to set the takeoff thrust, which is in a completely separate menu from perf. It's in TRS, thrust rating setting. Now we said we're going to use takeoff 2, so we're actually going to use climb 2 as well for the climb thrust. So you just flick it across to highlight climb 2. TLA trim is thrust lever angle trim. It basically maintains the angle between the thrust levers, keeps them basically the same thrust setting on both sides. We keep that on, and we go to takeoff data set or settings. And this is where you fill in takeoff data settings. Now unfortunately we don't have any flex figures, so we just literally select for this takeoff 2, and then on the right hand side you've got ATIX, which is the automatic takeoff thrust control system, which gives you additional takeoff thrust if you were to lose an engine on takeoff on the other engine for the loss of thrust. So we leave that on, and then reference ECS. ECS is your basic environmental control system, basically to do with the packs. So it's packs on or off in effect. We leave them on unless we're really strapped for performance, so we need all the thrust in the world. So that's on. Reference anti-ice off, that's fine, and the flex takeoff off, that's all good as well. So we just hit enter, and now if we look up here, this should go to takeoff 2, ATIX armed, 87.8, and that's all set up there. The only other thing I'd check for takeoff is this pitch trim. Now unfortunately again we don't really have anything to calculate it with, but the main thing is to keep it within this green band. Now it's in the green band at the moment at 3, what I'll do is I'll just shift it up a little bit, because it can be a little bit difficult to rotate otherwise at the given speed. So I like to have it in the upper half of the green band. So there's 4. So that's it done. So that's the initial setup completely done on the ground, and we'll go to another video now to show pushback, startup and taxi. Okay guys, ready for pushback, and just a quick thing I missed earlier was to set the VFS in your speed window. So go up to your FGC and just switch that to, obviously, to manual, so you get turquoise speeds, and 188 to match your VFS speed that we set for takeoff earlier, so that we have something to aim for once we take off. So now that we're ready for pushback, what we'll do is we'll turn on the beacon, and we will switch the transponder to alt-on. That we preset that earlier. So we'll request our pushback clearance, use autosave. He'll ask for the parking brake, and we'll just watch that light goes out. Here's your handbrake, parking brake off, and it's extinguished. Now to start the engines, as I said earlier, I don't know if I did say earlier, make sure you've got pressure going to the engines here. This is the bleed air pressure. As long as you've got the APU running and you've got pressure, the engines will start, otherwise they won't. So we just start engine 2 first to start, and then it'll pop to run. You've got N2, ignition B. Get some fuel flow very shortly. We set that to RTO earlier. Fuel flow. The oil pressure increases, N1 rotation. And you'll see here on the electrical panel that the APU is still feeding AC bus 1 with that green line, but IDG2, the generator in engine 2, is feeding AC bus 2. So we're looking for that to extinguish before we switch off the APU. Start engine 1. Watch this drop here, look. PSI dropping, the bleed air pressure. It does all the packs and everything automatically, so as long as you leave it in the automatic position, as well as having the APU running, this should be seamless. N2, ignition B, fuel flow, oil pressure, N1 rotation.
Set parking brakes.
Okay, we'll set the parking brake. Parking brake set. Cover these switches so we don't accidentally knock them into flight. And if you look at the electrical panel now, we've got a clear line, so we know it's now safe to switch off the APU. If it wasn't a clear line, you'd get a power interruption and the lights would flicker. So we're looking for uninterrupted power. There we go, to off, and you'll get a message, APU shutting down. We'll set flap 1 ready for departure. He's just disconnecting.
Tow truck disconnected.
Okay, now he said tow just disconnected, we can switch on that pump 3A if it isn't already. We can now go ahead and do the flight controls check. So go to the flight controls page. Do the tops first. They should become fully illuminated when they are at their full extension, but they don't have to be. So for example, when we do the ailerons on this aircraft, the ailerons become fully green, but the multifunction spoilers don't. But that's acceptable. And the rudder. Okay, we're ready for taxi. Bring this page back to status before we taxi. Reason for that is if we do need to evacuate while we're taxiing, we can see which doors have been opened and on which side of the aircraft. Put the taxi lights on, nose and side lights, and we can begin taxiing. Okay, we're approaching the runway now. We'll just pretend that we've got the cabin secure from the cabin crew to make sure that everything is good in the back, ready for takeoff. And we can turn the sterile sign on until 10,000 feet so they don't interrupt us during an important phase of flight. We'll use this intersection departure here at Manson at Bravo since we're quite light today. So as we enter the runway, we've been cleared for takeoff. We can switch the landing lights on and the strobe on. We can go to map mode on both sides, and we can bring the weather radar to on. So just go here, bring up weather radar. So we've got FSB for standby. And then what we can do is switch the transponder to TARA, and we will do a configuration test with Miss Brasilia. So that's this little button down here in front of the thrust levers. We just push it and she should say take off OK.
Take off OK.
If for whatever reason the configuration for takeoff isn't correct, she will give no takeoff a warning. So she might say no takeoff brakes, for example. So I've set the parking brake.
No takeoff brake.
And all you do if that happens is correct the condition. So in this case, the parking brake, and do it again.
Take off OK.
Make sure she says take off OK before we take off. And the last thing we do is turn the auto throttle to on. So you push the AT above the speed selector, and you should get in the PFD window AT and TO for auto throttle and takeoff mode. So now we're in a position ready for takeoff. Yep. So we can set our thrust levers. Now, because we've hit toga on the stand back there, we will already be ready to take the thrust levers once you push them up. So just set them to 40% initially, which is that first indent on the ICAS. So now they're stable, we can start pushing them up further, and once we get to about 55%, the thrust levers will be taken by the auto throttle. Now I'm not pushing them myself, but I will follow it up on my quadrant. Just a little bit, trying to keep the centre line here.
Thrust checked.
Here we go.
80 knots.
Bit of left aileron. Whee.
V1. Rotate. Positive brake.
Gear up. So we rotate initially to about 15 degrees of pitch. Not really following the flight director because it's not really modelled very well initially. And then at about 1,000 feet the thrust will reduce to climb thrust, and we can, at 400 feet even, we can hit heading mode. Just bring it to our heading. 1,000 feet climb thrust, we hit flight level change. Now we follow the flight director, and it will pitch for 188 knots. Still flying manually for now. Alright, I'll turn the autopilot on. And once we get to 3,000 feet, I'll start increasing speed and cleaning up. Let's begin our turn towards Dagger. Degrees. Approaching 3,000 feet, so we can increase the speed to 10 initially. We're above the flap speed with the F bug there. Flap 0 selected. Once the flap slats are 0, you can then go ahead and increase speed to 250. And as we approach 5,000 feet, I'll just go into vertical speed mode, reduce the rate down to something sensible like 1,000 feet per minute. Let's say we've been cleared direct to Dagger, we go to flight plan, bring Dagger from its position in the flight plan and put it at the top of the flight plan. Then hit active, and then activate, and that will center us on Dagger. Then hit nav, and you'll get a magenta LNAV. If I zoom out on the map display now, not quite that much. You'll see we're now heading towards Dagger. Remain at 5,000 feet until we sort of get towards Southend. So it's quite a low segment, and I will stop the video. But basically you'll see this A cell is armed to capture the altitude, and then once it's captured, the VS will go, well, there you go, A cell to green, and then from A cell to alt once it's captured fully. Alright, I'll pause the video here and we'll catch up once we start climbing a bit further. We'll just pretend that we've been cleared to 270, so we'll select 270 in the A cell. The auto throttle on this isn't fantastic, it's struggling to maintain 250 knots. There's just a few lumps and bumps here at 5,000 feet. 270. Because it's quite a big climb, we can hit flight level change and it will climb at 250 knots initially. There it goes. Just pitching for 250 now. And as we go through transition altitude at 6,000 feet, we'll set standard. The easiest way of doing that in this particular model is just by hitting the button. Doesn't really work very well at all.
Transition altitude.
There we go, B, and then you should see standard down there. As we get to 10,000 feet, we'll turn the landing lights off. We'll let the cabin crew go because it's quite a short flight, and we'll turn the stereo light off. And we'll switch to FMS speeds. Start pushing this heading bug round, ready for the sharp turn towards Clacton. So here's coming up to 10,000 feet. We'll just turn the landing lights off, and of course the taxi lights off as well. Don't need those in the air. We can turn the stereo light off and turn the passenger signs off. We then just flick this switch here on the speed window to FMS, and you'll see it'll start increasing by itself towards the 280 knots that we pre-selected. Might make a hash of this turn, but there we go. So it will then climb up at 280 knots. On transition it will go to .75, although we won't get high enough for it to do that. And then once it gets to its cruise altitude, it will increase to 300 knots or .78, whichever. And we keep FMS speeds pretty much throughout the whole of the flight until we get to our approach and landing. The other thing, if you did set something in the nav window for your departure, you just hit delete to get FMS auto back at this stage. And because this is such a short flight, even in the climb we'll start preparing for the arrival. So first things first, I'll set the minima. We aren't going to use the minima here. For the RA we're going to use Barrow, so I'm just scrolled that right down to close it away and then bring up Barrow. It's I'll show you the weather in a minute, but it's runway 24 in use at Rotterdam, and the minima for runway 24 is 185, so we'll set 190. And we don't necessarily actually need to set any course or frequency. It should do that all automatically with FMS Auto. We'll go through some landing performance too once we get to our well, we'll start doing it now in fact. So let's put an arrival in. Nav, arrival, runway 24. It's the ILS runway 24 that we want. via Mazos or the ROT NDB. Probably neither. We'll do vectors. Star though, we will use a star, and the star is the red for 2 Romeo. Yeah, red for 2 Romeo. So we'll select the star there, insert, activate. Okay, so with that said there, we know now that Mazos is the last waypoint. We might as well go to arrival, bring up the ILS again via Mazos, select the red for 2 Romeo again, insert, activate, and now that's put some form of an arrival in. I'll quickly show you the weather in Rotterdam. It's not a fantastic day, I must admit. So it's right now it's 210 at 24 knots. It's saying becoming 210 at 24, gusting 34, varying between 170 and 250. 10 kilometers viz, scattered 3,500 feet, broken 3,900, broken 4,400, 20 degrees, and the QNH 905. I will just double check what it's saying on my real world weather here for Rotterdam to make sure that it's all as it should be on my iPad. Yeah, it's saying 210 at 20, gusting 32, so it's close enough. It's quite a big, a fairly big gust, 12 knots, so we'll have to add that on the approach speed. Usually I would suggest flaps full on the sim. In real life I'd use flap 5 for sure, but this wrong one, heading bug, that's what I want. This aircraft is just is not very good at modelling, so we always use flap full, even in gusty conditions really, for the Embraer on the field air model, because it's just far too slippery and it won't slow down otherwise. What we will go ahead and do right now is set the auto brakes to medium, ready for landing, and then we'll start setting up the perf, landing, and in fact, before we do that, I think it's not really going to reach 270. You can see it goes straight up and then comes straight down again. So let's stop earlier than that. Let's stop at 2.3. And remember I said earlier we need to update the perf init page 3 to reflect that we are going to be at 230 now. And I'll do the same with the winds, so 230. Just remember the cruise winds when you do this. So 222.77. Oh, it stays there on this model. Okay. So we'll maintain 230, and you can already see the top of drop is coming up quite quickly. Perf, landing, and we'll just quickly get our landing speed. So to do that, we go back into our landing speed table. We scroll halfway down to the E170 landing speed. We haven't had any icing, so we'll use without ice accretion, and we will use the landing speed. So what we do to find out our landing weight is we get effectively our current fuel. It's 2.9. We use the FMS second MCDU here. So our current weight 2.9 tons, and we're going to land runway 24 with 2.4 tons, so 500 off what we've got. Our current gross weight is 31710 from page 3, and then minus the 500 that we talked about gives you 31.2. So we'll use 31.5. Let's round it up. What I'll do is I'll already preset the descent now before we go any further, because otherwise we might forget. we're going to descend down to 3,000 feet for the arrival. This is a very short flight. So 3,000 and then just hit VNav and that will go to VAlt. And when it gets to that top of drop, let's see if we can see here. When it gets to this point here, the top of descent here, it'll go to path effectively and then follow it down at 300 knots. So going back to the speeds, what did we say? 31.5. We go into this table with the landing speeds, 31.5. It's in between these two. And we're going to use flat fall because we always do, so it's this one here, 122 for the VREF. So perf, landing, page 3, 122. V approach, well, you usually add 5 knots on for V approach. However, it's a bit windy today, so you add a bit more. Go back to that weather again, and what we'll do is we'll just refresh the weather now. Conditions, Echo Hotel Romeo Delta. So it's 24 gusting 34. It's effectively a 17 gusting 27 headwind. So we use half the headwind, so half of 17, we'll call it 8, 9, call it 9, plus the full gust, it's a 10 knot gust, so 19 on top of 22, so 141, which seems like quite a lot, but because it's so windy, it's kind of necessary. We'll just have to plant it on the ground. And then we use a V approach climb here of let's say I usually add about 10 knots on VREF for this, so I'll just put 132. And for the VFS, that will already be filled in, but that's from your takeoff. You're actually lighter now. So again, 31.5, going into that table again, 31, 32, so in between the two. VFS is the last one, so 180, let's call it 185. So it's dropped off 3 knots during the flight. So we're making our way down towards Rotterdam now. Just center the heading bug. We'll turn the seatbelt signs back on, and as we get to 10,000 feet the sterile will go back on, as will the lights come back. But that's pretty much it set up for the landing speeds. Auto brake is set, we've got the minima set, so we're pretty much ready to roll for the landing. The main thing is we're double checking when we get closer in that we've got the right frequency for the approach. So for ILS runway 24 it's going to be 110.9. What I'll do is just in case it doesn't, I've got it there, 110.9. And then when we get closer in, we'll hit preview, and this brings up the course bar ready to go for the approach. We make sure that the course lines up. So inbound course is 237. So that should all automatically happen as we get closer. If it doesn't, we have to do it manually. Certain airfields like Manston you have to do manually anyway because it's not really in the nav data. Alright, so guys, we're approaching 10,000 feet now, and as you can see the FMS speeds have automatically reduced our target speed to 240 knots, which has brought the thrust levers back. So that's the nice thing about FMS speeds, as long as you set it correctly on the ground, it does everything automatically in flight. We're just approaching Mazos now, and then we're going to turn left towards the airfield, and as we go through 11,000 feet, we'll call it 10,000 feet and start turning on the lights and the star light. And then we can fly the approach and landing. It's just giving us this message here: flight path angle too steep, because it reckons it's going to be difficult to maintain, I guess. But if we do need to use flight level change, we will. Right, so it's just... it gets a bit confused sometimes, this model, I think. I'm going to go to vertical speed and continue down at 1,000 feet per minute. That just will settle it down a little bit. And then we can turn on the landing lights. So before you're cleared to land, you put the outers on, and the same for the taxi lights, the sides, and then the sterile as well, below 10,000 feet. Okay guys, you join us back over the airfield. We're pretty much on top of Rotterdam now, and you can see the speeds just getting carried away. So I'm going to go into manual speeds now and start reducing it right back to 210. And what I might have to do at this stage is actually take the auto throttle out, just because it's a bad model. Okay, it's moving all around, so I just hit the auto throttle button up there and just bring the throttles back to idle. We'll set the QNH, which is 994, and we'll continue down to 2,000 feet as we go outbound here. It's just dropped into FPA, which is a basic mode, so I'll just go vertical speed again and set 1,000 feet per minute. Now this feel there model of this Embraer is incredibly slippy. So I highly recommend you get it configured before you go down any glide slope whatsoever, and that's exactly what I'll be doing today. So if you do need to take extra track miles, then do so. Don't be afraid to do that. And if you need to take the auto throttle out like I have just done, it's not really, it's not what we do in the real aircraft, because we don't have to. But in this model, it's something that sometimes you just have to do to keep the speed under control. So we're just getting up to our, you can see it's getting bounced around a bit, to our platform altitude of 2,000 feet. Just remember, when you do take the auto throttle out, you are in control of the speed. There's no protection. If you do get slow, you may well stall. So it's really important that you keep an eye on your speed when the auto throttle's out. In fact, what we'll do, 210, sorry, onto the heading bug, round to where we are. We will pretend that we've been cleared for landing now. I'll turn the nose lights on so we don't forget them, because I have a feeling this approach could be a bit spicy with the wind as it is. We've got 42 knots of wind at 2,000 feet, so it's a bit of a windy day. In the real aircraft I wouldn't actually mind too much, because you're there, you can feel it, you can deal with it. But this model is not a great model. It doesn't handle things well. At this stage we could actually check to make sure that it's, there you go, it's tuned 110.9 in the radio page. Make sure we've got enough thrust here. I'm going to start setting flap as well. 110.9 and nav 1. We hit preview and it should come up with the correct inbound course 237. It does. So that's all good. You can do that once you're upwind upwind of the approach. With flap 1 we can do 190 knots, and we'll set flap 2 now. And we can do 180 knots with flap 2. It's going to start turning around to final approach now. Just follow the heading bug round. I have found on occasion with this model that you may need to push VL to arm the approach, but we'll see what happens on this one. If you do need to go into VL, then just go into heading first, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So you should, in theory, because you can in the real aircraft, be able to arm the approach in LNAV, and it will flip over to approach mode. I'm going to hit gear down, flap 3, just so that we don't end up fast or on the approach. It's now going to need a bit more thrust, so we've got a bit more drag out. Keep the heading bug coming round. So gear down, flap 3, speed 160. Should work with all weights as well. Even though you're below that F bug, it's just what we use. And then the next flap setting is in fact flap 5, because flap 4 is for takeoffs and missed approaches only. Flap 5 is for landings, but we will be using flap 4. So it'll be flap 5 speed, usually 140, but in this case, flap 5 speed 141, I think we set, and then flap 4 just pretty much straight away, I guess. What we can do is arm the approach now, and hopefully it will arm. Yep, it's working today. Well, at least the localizer is. We'll see what happens with the glide slope. Landing. Speed 141 for approach speed. So I'll start saying that now, in fact. Flap 5. You can see the runway off to the left there. So if it doesn't work, we can go in visually. Just catching the speed dropping off there. Flap full. So it is a lot of drag for level flight, but we have to do that because this model is not fantastic. There we go, it's not actually captured the localizer, so it's gone through, which is unfortunate. What we may have to do is do our own thing at the moment. So I'm going to go to heading mode, and then VL, so we green screen, approach. Why isn't it picking up their localizer? 110.9 is correct. Weird. Okay. So when everything else goes wrong, you just have to fly it yourself. Our top of drop here is at 6.3 miles. I'm going to turn the flight director off. Unfortunately, this video has not worked out as I'd hoped for the ILS itself, but most of the, the same stuff applies, so it's just unfortunate we can't fly an ILS. So as long as that speed's between VAP and VREF, you're more or less okay. Okay, we'll start pushing the nose down slightly now. So as you can see, this green bug here is your flight path FPA, flight path angle. And you just set that on the 3 degrees for a 3-degree slope. So she's descending now. It's 2000 for the missed approach, so that's fine. It's unfortunate about this this ILS. It should be fully working, but it's not. So we'll just accept it as it is and land visual. It's fortunate that we are visual today. It's just windy. Still 40 knots of wind. So what I'll do is come out approach mode. So this is me doing a visual approach, which is you don't find often. So please excuse. Oh wow, did you see that speed drop there? And a wing drop. Wow, it's sporty. So just be prepared with the thrust levers. I mean, I would probably, it's probably not a bad idea to take the auto throttle out, even if it wasn't messing around earlier. At least I've got control of the speed. Just basically, I'm just looking at the runway and at my BFD to try and set a touchdown point. The Pappy's a secondary, really. I mean, obviously I want to be too white, too red, but I'm looking more at the runway itself and the touchdown zone. There you go, 3 whites. So, there we go. Look at the speed. Wow. It's we're going to have a bit of sink here as well. 20 knots of wind at the moment. It's just gusty. There we go, look at that speed dropping off. There's a sink. There we go, and we're back up again. Approaching minimums. Look at the speed.
Minimum. 200.
Speed. Wow.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Bit of aileron into wind. We've got reverse. Water brakes are working. 60. Out of reverse. Manual brakes. That's how you do it. It was a bit sporty, eh? Well, we're here in Rotterdam anyway. I don't think I embarrassed myself quite. But exciting times nonetheless. So we're going to Bravo 2, so we'll just slowly come off the runway here. Sometimes you get like a hot brakes message when you're manual braking in this model. Again, it's just a sim thing. So we can turn the weather radar to standby. We've gone back to the status page already. Electrical page on that. Flaps coming up. You know, the spoilers on this are all automatic, if I didn't already mention. You know, they would have come up themselves. And we can go to Old Tom. Just make sure we're still on the taxiway. Old Tom, yep. Start the APU. Turn off the landing lights, turn off the strobe. Well, you know, it's unfortunate that the ILS didn't work. But at the same time, you know, you got to see something different there. I think the landing speeds worked out quite well. I left a bit more thrust on towards the end there just to account for any last minute speed drop. I would recommend doing that. But usually in this aircraft I take the thrust off at 40 feet and then flare. If you've got balls, maybe at 20 feet, but otherwise 30 feet will do. We're going to Bravo 2. No, don't really need to follow me. Just have a quick look outside where we actually are going. There it is, Bravo 2. Yeah, you know, it's... I think usually you'd actually taxi in from that side, but it doesn't matter. Nobody else here. Yeah, you know, it's... in inclement weather conditions like that, you've just got to do what you've got to do to make the aircraft do what you need it to do. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that's what it is. In real life, they've actually extended all this terminal out now, I think. So they had a big tent up for a while. So we'll turn the taxi lights off as to not dazzle the ground guy. I don't know what we would have done if it, you know, if it wasn't. I suppose we'd do an RNAV approach. They do have an RNAV approach here. You know, if we couldn't get the ILS to work and it wasn't visual conditions, it wouldn't have been very good. I don't know why the ILS didn't work. Something to do with the sim. We are turning onto the stand now. That'll do. So set the parking brake, park brake set, make sure the APU is running, it is. We can switch off the engines. Stand by on the transponder. We can turn pump 3A to off, and then once the engines have gone to off on here, off, we can turn the beacon off as well. And we can turn the sterile and the passenger signs off. It's a bit dark, isn't it? I don't know if this will, the light will turn on. No, it won't, unfortunately, because it's too bright outside still. And that's it. We're here on the stand. We've shut down. All that would be left to do now is open the doors and let the passengers off. So there you have it, guys. You know, it was a bit of a messy arrival, given the fact that the ILS didn't really work. And it was windy and we had to take the auto throttle out, but you could see how the foundations were built up to make an ILS approach. I might make another video to show you an ILS with the Embraer, but that's basically how we fly an approach, or how we get to the point where we fly an approach. And then you saw a visual approach. You know, it's good to see every now and then. So we'll shut down here on the stand, and I'll leave it there. So, as I say, I might make another video, but this is the initial Embraer video, done and dusted. Well, thanks again, and if you have any queries or any issues at all, don't hesitate to come back to us at the Manson Air training training department. You can get to us on email, in fact, now at training@mansonair.com. Or you can visit the training portal, which is training.mansonair.com. Alright guys, have a great day, and I hope to speak to you soon.